So, Pokémon Yellow. For a while, most generations of Pokémon games would follow a somewhat predictable pattern. To use the same terminology as Bulbapedia, each generation would start off with a pair of original versions. These games would introduce new Pokémon, a new region, a new storyline, etc. Then there would usually be two more releases within that generation. One of them would be a set of remakes, giving the players the means of experiencing what is, in effect, one of the classic games, but with the graphics, sound font, and battle mechanics of the current generation, often with a bunch of expansions and fixes as well. The third release tended to be an upper version. These aim to be an expanded, enhanced, and all-around more definitive take on the original versions. In practice, one of the original versions is typically what you would play when that generation was first released, while the upper version is usually what you would play if you were to go back to that generation at a later date. People often complain about paid DLC nowadays, but these were effectively the same thing if you think about it. Pokémon Yellow, otherwise known as Special Pikachu Edition, was the first of these upper versions, again not counting any Japan exclusive releases. You may have noticed that, compared to my review of Red and Blue, this one is a fraction of the length. Pokémon Yellow is set in the same region, on the same console, has mostly the same gameplay mechanics, and is largely a retelling of the same story, so you can probably imagine that I'm not going to have a dramatically different opinion on this game. This video is going to focus mainly on the differences that do exist, and whether it actually succeeds at being an improvement. One of the biggest changes from Red and Blue is made apparent right off the bat. After Oak has you follow him to his lab, you are not given a choice of starter. Pokemon Yellow is largely based on the anime, so mimicking Ash, you are given a Pikachu and have no say on the matter. I don't know why this also means the rival gets Eevee, considering he gets one of the regular starters in the anime, but whatever. So, this Pikachu. If you saw my Pokemon Red and Blue video, or if you're at all familiar with the Kanto region, you already know precisely why Electric isn't exactly the best type to start out with in this game. And it turns out, this Pokemon, who was already going to struggle through large chunks of the game, also comes with a catch. This Pikachu can never be evolved into Raichu. If you try to use a Thunderstone on them, they will simply refuse. This is another way the game references the anime, where Ash's Pikachu always refused to evolve. But the experience the player winds up having in the game as a result of this doesn't really wind up matching how it goes in the anime. For one, the anime operates under very different logic from the games, where things like base stat total and level obviously don't factor in as much. Therefore, in that canon, it isn't that unusual for unevolved Pokemon to appear even in high-level battles. In the games, it very much is. I've taken on the league with unevolved Pokemon before. It generally doesn't go very well. Secondly, even within the anime's logic, Ash's Pikachu is supposed to be unusually powerful for a Pikachu. I mean, it's the whole reason Team Rocket becomes obsessed with capturing him.
That Pikachu is no ordinary Pikachu!
It's certainly very rare. A perfect prize.
Let's catch it!
The Pikachu the player gets in Pokemon Yellow is, as far as the game's battle mechanics are concerned, a completely normal Pikachu. When you don't have the power of God and anime on your side, and are actually restricted to whatever the game says Pikachu's stats are, you're left with a Pokemon that's getting completely power crept by the mid-game, let alone the Elite Four. By the end, Pikachu was far too weak to successfully 1v1 any of the opposing Pokemon, even ones they had a massive type advantage against. Oh my, you can't even outspeed it? I was mostly just having them clean up on Pokemon that were already weakened, mainly to save power points on my stronger Pokemon's moves. Frankly, I was surprised they were still making any in-battle appearances that late in the game. I suppose you could just not have the Pikachu on your team if you don't want to, but the game kind of intentionally guilt-trips you for doing this. Pikachu has a friendship mechanic with the player in this game, and one of the things that makes Pikachu upset with you is depositing them. So, in effect, most people who play this game are essentially playing with a team of 5 plus a mascot. Aside from the battle sprites in this game looking so much better than their counterparts from Red and Blue, the battle system is mostly the same as it was in the original games. It's quite rare for any significant changes to be made to these mechanics within the same generation. The trainers you battle against, however, do quite often have a few changes made to them in the upper versions. In Red and Blue, the gym leaders were total jokes for the most part. The vast majority of them could easily be swept by spamming one move with one of my Pokémon. In Pokémon Yellow, it seems like they tried to amend this a little bit. The level curve is somehow even more absurd than it was in the previous games, and the Pokémon used by the bosses actually have custom movesets now, rather than simply knowing the last 4 moves they learn by level up. This does make the bosses tougher on paper, but the question is whether this actually comes across in practice, and the answer is kind of. Unfortunately, they are still restricted to the same hyper-simplistic battle system, the same Pokédex with the same redundancy problem for Pokémon of the same type, mostly the same pretty shallow move pools, and the same terrible AI. It was a little more common for one of them to score 1 or 2 KOs on my Pokémon, but for most of the game my winning strategy still pretty much boiled down to move my cursor to one of these 6 moves and mash A. Misty was still a problem only because of Gen I's bizarre crit mechanics, Erica was still a problem only because the AI cheats and Sleep and Wrap are broken in these games. There were only 2 gym leaders that went substantially different for me compared to how they went in Red and Blue. One of them was Brock. This battle has very similar problems to the one it had in Red and Blue, only this time, I couldn't avoid getting walled by him by simply not picking Charmander. By the time the player gets to Brock's gym, Pikachu is probably going to be around level 10. At that level, their only attacking move is Thunder Shock, which every single Pokemon in Brock's gym is straight up immune to. Forget Brock himself, it's impossible for Pikachu to even beat the random junior trainer you fight before him. Even after they learn Quick Attack at level 11, Brock's Pokemon are still going to pretty much completely wall it. Unless they want to grind Pikachu to level 50 or something, the player needs to catch something else if they wish to get through. In my video on Red and Blue, I commented that Kanto had a pretty poor selection of Pokemon available to catch prior to Brock's gym, and I find it kind of vindicating that in Pokemon Yellow, the developers pretty much acknowledge this to be the case. While the list of species available has not changed, several of them have had their movesets altered to include moves which are super effective on Brock's rock types, because otherwise the first gym would be almost impossible. Nidoran and Double Kick might be one of the most famous Pokemon and move combinations in the entire series, and it's probably because nearly every single person who's ever played Pokemon Yellow had to use it in order to beat the first gym. I like Nidoran, but his presence here bugged me a little bit when I was putting together the team I was planning on using for this playthrough. You see, I like having options, plural. Having option, singular, is a marginal improvement over how it was for players who chose Charmander in the original games, but I like it when there's a healthy variety of potential teams that can get the player past a certain boss fight, and find it a bit annoying when having one of a very small pool of Pokemon on my team is basically mandatory. If I were to use Nidoran on my team, I'd prefer it be because I wanted to, not because I had to. You may also have noticed in the footage that Brock's Onix knows Bind now, which it didn't in Red and Blue. It still kind of blows my mind how they could possibly have programmed this move into the game and thought it was fair and balanced. The other gym leader who went differently in this game was Giovanni. His Dugtrio landed a Fissure, a guaranteed OHKO move, on my Starmie turn 1, just instantly deleting my best Pokemon for his team from the battle, and later in the fight his Nidoking took down my Tauros with Double Kick. Neither of these were moves they would know without the AI trainers in Pokemon Yellow getting custom movesets, so in my playthrough this was about the only gym battle where that change actually paid off for the gym leader, albeit it required me to get a bit unlucky. The rest of my team just wasn't the best suited for dealing with ground types, with Alakazam being very physically frail and the other 3 all being weak to their moves, so I wound up losing to Giovanni, something I never expected to happen in any of the Kanto-based games. In the rematch, I decided to lead with my Tauros instead, since I thought they could still 1v1 Dugtrio without it effectively being an instant loss for me if they happened to get fissured right off the bat. Between both of the Gen 1 games I've played through, this is the only gym battle that actually made me have to think about what I was doing even a little bit, so props to Giovanni, I guess. I mentioned earlier that Pokemon Yellow is based on the anime, but what does that actually mean? Not that much, to be honest. Neither the plot nor the Kanto region have been changed at all from how they were in Red and Blue, none of the characters are rewritten to more closely resemble their anime counterparts. Aside from giving the player a Pikachu as a starter, the only ways in which the game noticeably incorporates the anime are that some of the random Team Rocket grunts are replaced with unnamed Jesse and James lookalikes, Surge, Erica, and kind of Giovanni have had their teams slightly changed to more closely resemble the teams they used in the anime. None of the other gym leaders, just those three. Like, 3 random trainers have had their teams and dialogue changed in reference to minor characters from the anime, and there are a trio of NPCs that give you Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, with 2 of them again being references to anime characters. So, a few cameos. That's about it. I guess there is also the Pikachu's Beach minigame, which I think is based on an episode of the anime that I haven't seen, but for some bizarre reason, in the original version of Pokémon Yellow, this minigame is event exclusive. It can only be activated if the player has a Pikachu that knows the move Surf, which can only be obtained via distribution, or by transferring from Pokémon Stadium. This was changed in the Virtual Console release, but that's not the version I'm playing, so this minigame was completely inaccessible to me. Aside from the anime stuff, the only other tangible changes made to the adventure are a few fixes. Most of them are for relatively minor things you aren't likely to even notice on a casual playthrough, although I do want to point out that one of them is for a flaw that I actually highlighted in my Red and Blue video. When you battle the Lift Key guy in Team Rocket's hideout, he now drops the key immediately after the player defeats him, instead of making the player talk to him a second time. So once again, I felt kind of vindicated that the developers apparently agreed with me on something. I didn't bother catching the legendary birds again, since that whole side quest is also virtually unchanged from how it was in Red and Blue, so this time, after collecting the gym badges, I just went straight to the Pokemon League. These, by which I mean Lorelei, Lance, and the Champion, were among the only battles in Red and Blue to actually produce even a little bit of difficulty for non-stupid reasons, and that's largely gone unchanged in Pokemon Yellow. Bruno is still a joke, especially if you have an even moderately strong special attacker, especially if they happen to be Psychic type. Agatha is still a joke as long as you don't get unlucky with Confusion and Sleep. Lorelei, well, the fact that my electric type is a Pikachu definitely doesn't help versus her. And Lance, I actually lost to on my first attempt. Again, this was partly due to how outclassed Pikachu was at this point in the game, but this was also another place where the custom movesets actually came into play a little bit. Golem would have basically walled Lance's whole team except for Gyarados if they still had their Red and Blue movesets, but they don't. Even in my second, more successful attempt, he still took down 3 of my Pokemon with him. Lance was already one of the few boss fights I didn't consider to be a total joke in Red and Blue, and subsequently in Pokemon Yellow, he's one of the few who definitely makes an improved showing. And now, all that's left between us and the end of Gen 1 is one last battle against Blue. Though, going in line with the anime, I actually named him Gary this time. He has a completely different team in this game from the one he had in Red and Blue, with the only Pokemon he has in both games being Alakazam and potentially Exeggutor. Aside from that, my thoughts on this battle aren't really any different from my thoughts on that one. It works from a plot and character perspective, but I still think it's a bit underwhelming that the final battle is against the same team you've already fought and beaten many times throughout the game. Unfortunately for the storytelling aspect of this video, the battle was very anticlimactic, and actually goes pretty smoothly for me. I don't know if it was just because I played smarter this time, or if my team from this playthrough just happened to counter the rivals a lot better, but not a single one of my Pokemon went down during the champion battle. And with that, we enter the Hall of Fame. Just like Red and Blue, Yellow doesn't really have much of a post-game, so that means we are completely finished with Generation 1. On paper, Pokemon Yellow is a pretty definitive improvement over Red and Blue. It has far better sprite work, mostly has far better designed boss fights, and really the only reason to ever play Red and Blue instead is if you really like some of the version exclusives in those games, or if being forced to have Pikachu as your starter is a total deal breaker for you, which, honestly, fair. Unfortunately, I just don't believe it fully escapes many of the fundamental problems that come from it being a Generation 1 game set in the Kanto region. I mentioned some of these earlier, but just to recap, it has the same lousy AI, It has the same redundancy problem where every Pokemon of a certain type does effectively the same thing. It has the same incredibly shallow move pools. It has the same balancing issues with both the type chart and the special and speed stats. It has the same messy overworld, just to name a few. I'd somewhat likely choose to play it over Red and Blue if I had to play one of them, but that's about it. I still don't really see any reason to play this game over any of the later games, and frankly, I'm kind of glad to be finished with Generation 1. I just hope that means there's nowhere to go but up from here. I guess we'll see next time.